The world watches, holding its breath. A tiny strip of land, barely visible on a map, becomes the epicenter of global anxiety. This is Gaza, this is Israel, and this is a story about something far more profound than just rockets and airstrikes. It's about the thin threads of peace, constantly tested by the flames of ancient grievances. The Israel-Gaza conflict is not just another headline flickering across our screens. It's a deeply rooted struggle, a tangled web of history, religion, and politics. It's about land claimed and reclaimed, about narratives of suffering etched deep in the hearts of two peoples. Understanding this conflict means peeling back layers of resentment and mistrust, delving into the very essence of what it means to belong, to survive, to yearn for a future free from fear. This isn't just about politicians and military strategists playing a high-stakes game on a global chessboard. It's about the human cost, the invisible scars etched on the souls of innocent men, women, and children. It's about the Palestinian family, huddled in a darkened room, the air thick with the smell of fear, as bombs rain down upon their city. It's about the Israeli shopkeeper, his face etched with worry, as the piercing wail of air raid sirens shatters the afternoon calm. This is a story where everyone loses. There are no victors in this perpetual cycle of violence and despair. But understanding the complexities, acknowledging the shared humanity that binds us, even in the darkest of times, that's where a glimmer of hope emerges. That's where the conversation truly begins. We often hear about casualty figures, statistics that numb us with their cold detachment. But behind each number is a life, a story, a dream extinguished. The young Palestinian girl, her laughter silenced forever by a stray bullet, her future wiped out in a flash of senseless violence. The Israeli soldier, barely out of his teens, bearing the weight of conflict on his young shoulders, forever haunted by the things he's seen and done. This is a conflict that doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care about age, religion, or political affiliation. It leaves a trail of shattered lives in its wake, a stark reminder of the fragility of peace. We hear about ceasefires, temporary reprieves in the relentless cycle of violence. But what about the lasting peace? The kind that allows children to sleep soundly at night, that allows communities to rebuild, to hope, to dream. This is about the Palestinian mother, her eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and despair as she shields her children from the debris of their shattered home. It's about the Israeli father, his voice cracking with emotion, as he explains to his son why they must seek shelter underground. These are the human faces of a conflict that often feels abstract and distant. These are the stories that demand to be heard, the voices that cry out for peace. And what about the international community, the supposed guardians of peace and justice? Do they truly understand the depths of this despair, the urgency of this crisis? Or are we content to watch from a distance, offering empty platitudes and temporary solutions? The time for inaction is over. The world must demand better. This is not just an Israeli story. This is not just a Palestinian story. This is a human story. To truly grasp the Israel-Gaza conflict, one must journey back in time, not just decades, but centuries. Imagine a land imbued with religious significance for Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, a land where ancient empires rose and fell, leaving behind a tapestry of cultures and claims. This is where the story begins, long before the modern state of Israel, before the barbed wire fences and concrete barriers. The Zionist movement, born in the late 19th century, yearned for a Jewish homeland in their ancient biblical land. Meanwhile, the Palestinian people held fast to their own deep roots in the region. As waves of Jewish migration increased, tensions grew, culminating in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and the subsequent displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. This exodus, known as the Nakba, or catastrophe in Arabic, remains a deeply traumatic event, etched in the Palestinian collective memory. The decades that followed were punctuated by wars, uprisings, and failed peace agreements. The Six-Day War in 1967 resulted in Israel's capture of Gaza, along with the West Bank and East Jerusalem. This victory, while securing Israel's military dominance, also sowed the seeds for future conflict. The occupation of Palestinian territories, the expansion of Israeli settlements, and the Palestinian struggle for self-determination became the intractable core of the conflict we witness today. Imagine the weight of history pressing down on every negotiation, every handshake, every attempt at reconciliation. The ghosts of past battles linger, their echoes reverberating through generations. To understand the present, we must acknowledge this complex and often painful past. For it is here that the roots of resentment run deepest. Gaza, a tiny coastal enclave sandwiched between Israel and Egypt, has become a potent symbol of this enduring conflict. Home to over 2 million Palestinians, it's one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Years of conflict and a crippling Israeli blockade have left its economy in ruins, its infrastructure crumbling, and its people grappling with poverty and despair. Imagine life confined to a narrow strip of land, the movements of its inhabitants restricted, their access to essential goods controlled. This is the reality for the people of Gaza, living under what many describe as an open-air prison. Their daily lives are a constant struggle, marked by shortages of water, electricity, and essential medical supplies. On the other side of the divide stands Israel, a nation forged in the crucible of conflict, acutely aware of its own vulnerability. Haunted by a history of persecution, Israelis have developed a sophisticated military apparatus and a deep-seated instinct for self-preservation. They view Hamas, the Islamic militant group that governs Gaza, as a terrorist organization bent on their destruction. The security fence erected by Israel, while touted as a necessary measure to prevent attacks, has further isolated Gaza, cutting it off from the outside world and exacerbating the humanitarian crisis within. This physical barrier also represents a deeper psychological divide, a stark reminder of the seemingly insurmountable obstacles to peace. To understand the current escalation, we must delve into the rise of Hamas. Born from the ashes of the first Palestinian Intifada, or uprising in the late 1980s, Hamas offered a potent mix of Palestinian nationalism and Islamic resistance. It gained popularity through its social service networks, providing vital aid and support to a population struggling under Israeli occupation. Imagine a group of young Palestinians, disillusioned with the failures of past peace efforts, embracing a more militant path to liberation. They saw Hamas as a beacon of hope, a force willing to fight for their rights, even if it meant resorting to violence. Hamas's popularity grew with each passing year, fueled by a sense of despair and a belief that armed struggle was the only way to break free from Israeli control. In 2006, Hamas won a surprise victory in Palestinian legislative elections, further complicating the already fragile peace process. The international community, while acknowledging the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, struggled to reconcile with a group it labeled as terrorist. The subsequent Israeli blockade, imposed with the stated aim of weakening Hamas, ended up punishing the entire population of Gaza. The relationship between Hamas and Israel is one of deep mistrust and animosity. Hamas views Israel's very existence as an illegitimate occupation of Palestinian land, while Israel sees Hamas as an existential threat sworn to its destruction. This toxic dynamic, fueled by years of violence and recrimination, makes the path to peace a treacherous and uncertain one. May 2021. The holy city of Jerusalem, a tinderbox of faith and history, erupts once more. Tensions, simmering for weeks over land disputes and access to holy sites, boil over with shocking speed. What begins as clashes between Palestinian protesters and Israeli police escalates into something far more dangerous, a conflagration that will soon engulf the entire region. Imagine the narrow streets of the old city, the air thick with tear gas, and the sound of stun grenades. Young Palestinians, their frustration reaching a boiling point, hurl stones at heavily armed Israeli security forces. The images flash across the globe, a stark reminder of the unresolved grievances at the heart of this decades-long conflict. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Hamas watches closely, its leaders sensing an opportunity amidst the chaos. They frame the events in Jerusalem as an assault on Palestinian identity, a call to arms for all those who have suffered under Israeli occupation. As rockets begin to streak towards Israeli cities, a sense of dread settles over the region. The fragile peace, always precarious, has shattered once more. The international community, caught off guard by the sudden eruption of violence, scrambles for a response. Calls for de-escalation ring hollow as both sides dig in, their narratives hardening, their positions seemingly irreconcilable. The world watches, holding its breath, as the flames of conflict threaten to consume all hope. The skies above Gaza light up with the terrifying roar of Israeli warplanes. Precision-guided missiles, each carrying a payload of high explosives, slam into buildings, sending plumes of smoke and debris skyward. Hamas, outmatched militarily, resorts to launching volleys of rockets indiscriminately into Israel, aiming to sow fear and disrupt life in major cities. Imagine the terror of families huddled in bomb shelters, the deafening sirens a constant reminder of the danger lurking overhead. In Gaza, the situation is even more dire. The densely populated enclave, with its limited infrastructure and medical facilities, is ill-equipped to withstand the onslaught. Hospitals struggle to cope with the influx of casualties, their corridors overflowing with the wounded and dying. Israel defends its actions as a necessary response to Hamas's aggression, arguing that it targets military infrastructure and minimizes civilian casualties. Yet the images tell a different story. Apartment buildings reduced to rubble, schools and hospitals damaged, and innocent civilians, including children, paying the ultimate price. The international community condemns the violence on both sides, but its words ring hollow in the face of such suffering. Diplomatic efforts to broker a ceasefire flounder as mistrust and animosity run deep. Each rocket fired, each bomb dropped, only deepens the cycle of violence and pushes the prospect of a lasting peace further out of reach. As days turn into nights, the conflict takes on a grim rhythm of its own. Rocket attacks from Gaza are met with swift and devastating Israeli reprisals. The death toll mounts on both sides, each casualty fueling the flames of anger and resentment. The language used by leaders on both sides hardens, leaving little room for dialogue or compromise. Imagine the impossible choices facing ordinary people caught in the crossfire. Palestinian families, their homes destroyed, are forced to seek refuge in overcrowded UN shelters, their lives shattered by the relentless bombardment. Israeli communities, living under the constant threat of rocket fire, see their daily routines disrupted, their sense of security shattered. The international community, deeply concerned by the escalating violence and the growing humanitarian crisis, steps up its diplomatic efforts. Egypt, long a mediator between Israel and Hamas, renews its calls for a ceasefire. The United States, while expressing support for Israel's right to defend itself, also urges restraint and a return to negotiations. Yet, the path to de-escalation remains elusive. Hamas, despite suffering heavy losses, vows to continue its resistance until Israel ends its blockade of Gaza. Israel, determined to cripple Hamas's military capabilities, shows no signs of relenting in its air campaign. The world watches, a sense of helplessness and despair settling in, as the cycle of violence spins on, seemingly unstoppable. War, in its brutal indifference, doesn't distinguish between combatants and civilians. It doesn't see the innocence in a child's eyes, or the love etched on a mother's face. It simply unleashes its fury, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives and broken dreams. In the Israel-Gaza conflict, as in all wars, it's the innocent who bear the brunt of the suffering. Imagine families huddled in fear, their homes no longer sanctuaries but potential tombs. Children, their laughter silenced by the deafening roar of explosions, their playgrounds transformed into minefields of rubble and debris. Their small hands, meant for holding crayons and toys, now clutching tightly onto their parents, seeking a comfort that feels increasingly fragile in a world turned upside down. The physical wounds inflicted by this conflict are impossible to ignore. Hospitals, struggling to cope with the influx of casualties, their corridors overflowing with the wounded and dying. Doctors and nurses, working tirelessly amidst the chaos, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair, fighting a losing battle against the relentless tide of suffering. But it's the invisible wounds, the ones etched deep within the human psyche, that may prove the most enduring legacy of this conflict. The trauma of living under constant threat, the fear that lingers long after the bombs have stopped falling, these are the scars that can take generations to heal. This is the true cost of war, the human cost, measured not in dollars or square kilometers, but in the shattered lives and broken spirits of those caught in its crossfire. It's a cost that will continue to accrue long after the last shot is fired, a heavy burden carried by generations to come. Gaza, already teetering on the brink of collapse before the latest escalation, now faces a humanitarian catastrophe of staggering proportions. Years of conflict and a crippling blockade have left its infrastructure in ruins, its economy in tatters, and its people grappling with poverty, unemployment, and a profound sense of hopelessness. Imagine a place where basic necessities like clean water, electricity, and medical supplies are in chronically short supply. Where hospitals, overwhelmed by the influx of casualties, are forced to make impossible choices about who receives treatment and who is left to die. Where schools, once beacons of hope and opportunity, now lie in ruins, their students deprived of an education and robbed of their future. The Israeli blockade, while justified by security concerns, has had a devastating impact on the lives of ordinary Palestinians in Gaza. It has restricted the flow of essential goods and services, crippled the economy, and fostered a sense of isolation and despair. The recent escalation has only exacerbated this already dire situation, pushing Gaza to the brink of collapse. International aid organizations, struggling to deliver assistance amidst the ongoing conflict, warn of a looming humanitarian disaster. They paint a grim picture of widespread displacement, food insecurity, and a collapsing healthcare system. They plead for an immediate ceasefire and an end to the blockade, warning that the alternative is unthinkable. The world cannot stand idly by as a humanitarian crisis of this magnitude unfolds. The people of Gaza, trapped in a cycle of violence and despair, deserve better. They deserve a future free from fear, a future where their children can grow up with hope, not hunger. They deserve a chance to rebuild their lives and their communities, to reclaim their dignity and their humanity. While the physical wounds of war may heal with time, the psychological scars can linger for generations. The constant fear of explosions, the loss of loved ones, the disruption of normalcy, these experiences leave an indelible mark on the human psyche, particularly for children who are especially vulnerable to the trauma of conflict. Imagine a child's world, once filled with the colors of imagination and the sounds of laughter, now dominated by the grays and blacks of destruction and the deafening roar of bombs. Their sense of safety shattered, their innocence stolen, they struggle to make sense of a world turned upside down. Nightmares replace dreams, and the carefree joy of childhood gives way to anxiety, fear, and a profound sense of loss. The psychological impact of this conflict extends far beyond the borders of Gaza. In Israel, too, citizens live with the constant threat of rocket fire, their daily lives punctuated by the piercing wail of air raid sirens. The fear of sudden attacks, the need to seek shelter at a moment's notice, takes a toll on their mental well-being, creating a climate of anxiety and uncertainty. Even those who escape physical injury bear the psychological scars of this conflict. Post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, and substance abuse are just some of the mental health challenges faced by those who have witnessed the horrors of war firsthand. These invisible wounds, often overlooked amidst the more visible signs of suffering, can have a devastating impact on individuals, families, and communities. Addressing the psychological impact of this conflict is not a luxury, but a necessity. Providing mental health support to those who need it, creating safe spaces for children to heal and play, and fostering a culture of understanding and empathy. These are essential steps towards building a more resilient and hopeful future for all those affected by this tragedy. As the fires of conflict rage in the Middle East, the international community finds itself thrust into the role of concerned observer, its pronouncements often ringing hollow amidst the deafening roar of bombs and the heart-wrenching cries of the wounded. From the halls of the United Nations to the streets of capitals around the world, a chorus of condemnation arises, denouncing the violence, urging restraint, and calling for a peaceful resolution. Imagine a world stage where diplomats, their faces etched with concern, deliver carefully worded statements, expressing their deep concern and grave disappointment at the escalating violence. Resolutions are drafted, debated, and often vetoed, the machinery of international diplomacy grinding slowly, its gears clogged by political maneuvering and competing national interests. Yet, despite the pronouncements and the posturing, the violence continues, a testament to the limitations of words in the face of deeply entrenched grievances and seemingly irreconcilable positions. The international community, often divided in its response, struggles to find a unified voice, its efforts hampered by a lack of consensus and the absence of a clear path towards a lasting peace. Some point fingers, assigning blame and demanding accountability. Others call for dialogue, urging both sides to come to the negotiating table and find a political solution. But as the death toll mounts and the humanitarian crisis deepens, a sense of frustration and impotence settles over the international community, its efforts to broker peace feeling increasingly futile in the face of such intractable animosity. Amidst the chaos and bloodshed, a handful of actors emerge, their roles as mediators fraught with risk and uncertainty, yet carrying the weight of hope for millions desperate for an end to the violence. Egypt, long a pivotal player in the region, its historical ties to both Israel and the Palestinians giving it a unique vantage point, steps cautiously into the fray, its diplomats engaging in a delicate dance of shuttle diplomacy. Imagine dimly lit rooms, the air thick with cigarette smoke and tension, as Egyptian officials meet separately with Israeli and Palestinian representatives. Their conversations hushed, their body language a study in guarded optimism. Each side presents its demands, its grievances, its aspirations for the future, the gulf between them often seeming insurmountable. The United Nations, its blue flag a symbol of hope amidst the rubble, also plays a crucial role. Its agencies working tirelessly to provide humanitarian assistance to those displaced by the fighting and to document human rights abuses. The UN Secretary General, his voice often drowned out by the din of war, issues impassioned pleas for a ceasefire, urging both sides to step back from the brink and choose the path of peace. But the mediators face an uphill battle. Trust is in short supply. The wounds of past betrayals run deep, and the political calculus on both sides is complex and unforgiving. Each concession is met with suspicion, each overture scrutinized for hidden agendas. The mediators, walking a tightrope between hope and despair, must navigate this treacherous terrain with skill, patience, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of peace. The Israel-Gaza conflict, a microcosm of the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict, reverberates far beyond the borders of the Middle East, sparking debate, fueling passions, and exposing deep divisions within the international community. From the streets of European capitals to the universities of American cities, the conflict ignites protests, sparks online campaigns, and generates a torrent of commentary, reflecting the diversity of perspectives and the complexity of the issues at stake. Imagine a world map, its surface awash in a kaleidoscope of colors, each hue representing a different stance on the conflict. Some stand firmly in solidarity with Israel, citing its right to defend itself against terrorism and emphasizing its historical and religious connections to the land. Others express unwavering support for the Palestinians, highlighting their decades-long struggle for self-determination and denouncing the Israeli occupation as a violation of international law. The conflict also exposes the limitations of traditional media narratives, as social media platforms become battlegrounds for competing narratives and sources of information, often blurring the lines between fact and fiction, propaganda and truth. The echo chambers of the online world can amplify existing biases, making it even more challenging to foster nuanced understanding and meaningful dialogue. Governments grapple with how to respond to the crisis, their foreign policy decisions often shaped by a complex interplay of domestic political considerations, strategic alliances, and economic interests. The conflict becomes a litmus test for international law and the responsibility to protect civilians, raising uncomfortable questions about the selectivity of outrage and the limits of humanitarian intervention. As the dust settles on yet another chapter of this seemingly endless conflict, the world watches, weary but not entirely without hope. The cycle of violence, deeply ingrained, fueled by generations of pain and mistrust, seems almost inevitable, a tragic inevitability that defies easy solutions. And yet, within this landscape of despair, glimmers of hope persist. flickering embers refusing to be extinguished by the winds of war. Imagine a young Palestinian girl, her eyes reflecting the horrors she has witnessed, picking her way through the rubble of her neighborhood, clutching a single flower that has miraculously bloomed amidst the destruction. Or picture a young Israeli soldier, his face etched with the weariness of battle, sharing a silent moment of understanding with a Palestinian mother at a checkpoint, their shared humanity transcending the barriers that divide them. These fleeting moments of connection, of empathy, of shared humanity remind us that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit endures, its capacity for compassion and forgiveness refusing to be entirely extinguished. They remind us that the narratives of conflict, while powerful, are not the only stories waiting to be told. For true peace to emerge, a profound shift in perspective is required on both sides. It demands a willingness to acknowledge the pain and suffering of the other, to move beyond the narratives of victimhood and blame, and to embrace a future where security and dignity are not mutually exclusive, but rather intertwined aspirations. The path to peace in the Israel-Gaza conflict is not a straight line, but rather a winding road, fraught with obstacles and setbacks. It demands courage, compromise, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of a different future. A future where children on both sides of the divide can grow up free from fear, where the echoes of bombs are replaced by the laughter of children playing, where the walls that separate are replaced by bridges of understanding. Imagine a future where Israelis and Palestinians, their shared history acknowledged, their legitimate aspirations respected, sit together at the negotiating table, not as adversaries but as partners in peace, where the language of violence is replaced by the language of diplomacy, where differences are resolved through dialogue and compromise, not through bombs and bullets. Achieving this vision requires the sustained engagement of the international community, not as a distant observer, but as an active participant in the peace process. It demands a commitment to providing humanitarian assistance to those in need, to addressing the root causes of the conflict, and to holding all parties accountable for their actions. It requires investing in education, fostering people-to-people exchanges, and supporting initiatives that promote dialogue and understanding between Israelis and Palestinians. It requires amplifying the voices of moderation, of those who dare to dream of a different future, and marginalizing the voices of extremism and violence. The road to peace may be long and arduous, but it is a journey worth taking. For in the words of Nelson Mandela, peace is not simply the absence of conflict. It is the creation of an environment where all people feel safe and secure, and where they can flourish and reach their full potential.